The morning sun rose over the red desert hills of Arizona, spreading light over the small Apache village where a young man named Toka lived. He was only 19, tall and strong with long black hair that shone under the sun. He loved to ride wild horses, chase the wind, and dream about life beyond the reservation. But life in those lands was hard. Food was short, and every season brought new struggles. One summer, a terrible drought hit their valley. The river dried up, the soil cracked, and the crops failed. The elders gathered the tribe around the big fire to make a decision. They spoke about unity, about families helping each other. To keep peace and strengthen the tribe, they arranged marriages between families. It was tradition, something not to be questioned. When Toka's name was called, he straightened proudly, expecting to be matched with a young girl from another clan. But when the elder said the name Naya, Toka froze. Naya was a widow, much older than him, nearly twice his age. She was kind, respected, and known as a healer, but still, she was not what Toka expected. The young men standing beside him whispered and laughed, his heart filled with embarrassment. That night he argued with his father. "Why me? She could be my mother," he shouted. His father looked at him quietly and said, "You are not a child anymore. The elders know what they do. Honor their choice." Those words silenced Toka, but inside he felt a storm. On the wedding day, the village gathered near the sacred fire. The women sang soft songs and the men played drums that echoed through the valley. Naya stood dressed in a simple woven shawl, her hair braided neatly, her eyes calm like a river. Toka stood beside her, stiff and silent, his heart heavy. When they placed the ceremonial necklace around his neck, he felt the weight, not just of the beads, but of responsibility he had not chosen. After the ceremony, they moved into a small hut near the edge of the village. Naya spoke gently, telling him he didn't need to pretend to love her. She only wished for peace and respect. Toka nodded but said little. Days passed in silence. He spent his time training horses and working in the fields. At night, he stayed near the corral instead of going home. Naya didn't stop him. She only made sure he had food left near the fire. One evening, a wild sandstorm swept through the valley. The wind howled. The sky turned brown and dust filled the air. Toka tried to guide the horses to shelter, but one kicked him hard and he fell, his leg cut deeply. Struggling through the storm, he limped back home. When he opened the door, Naya ran to him at once. Without a word, she made him sit by the fire, cleaned his wound, and wrapped it with herbs. Her hands were rough but gentle. Toka watched her face in the flickering light. There were lines near her eyes, signs of years and wisdom. She didn't speak much, but her calmness touched him. When he thanked her, she only said, "Rest. The horses will be fine. You must heal first." For the first time, Toka felt something other than anger. He felt cared for. In the following weeks, Naya continued to treat his leg with her herbal pastes. She showed him how different plants could heal wounds, ease pain, or stop fever. She knew every corner of the desert, the plants, the stones, even where water hid under dry ground. Toka began to follow her, watching her work. He realized she knew more about the land than anyone he had ever met. One day, a child from the village was bitten by a snake. People panicked, calling for help. Naya ran there quickly, taking her small leather bag filled with herbs. She made a drink from crushed leaves, spoke softly to the boy, and cleaned the wound. After some hours, the child's breathing calmed and the fever dropped. Everyone praised Naya. Toka stood quietly behind her, seeing her in a new light. Later that night, he asked her how she learned so much. She smiled faintly and said, "When you live long enough and lose enough, you start listening to what the earth says." Her words stayed in his mind. He began to see her not as an old woman, but as a wise soul, someone who had faced pain and still chose kindness. Toka started helping her collect herbs in the hills. She taught him the songs that their ancestors used to sing while gathering medicine. The air around them felt peaceful. Slowly, their silence turned into soft conversations. She told him stories of her childhood, about the times before the drought, about the laughter that once filled the tribe. He listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes lost in thought. Still, deep inside, Toka was confused. The other young men often teased him when they saw him walking beside Naya. "Learning from your grandmother?" they joked. Toka tried to ignore them, but the words stung. That night he sat outside their hut staring at the stars. Naya came out quietly and sat beside him. After a long silence, she said, "Sometimes life gives us not what we want, but what we need." He looked at her, surprised. Her eyes were kind but firm. "You think I am old," she continued softly, "and maybe I am. But maybe you are meant to learn something from me before life sends you elsewhere." She smiled gently and went inside. Toka didn't move for a long time. Her words echoed in his heart. From that night onward, Toka began to change. He spoke more kindly to her, helped with her work, and repaired the roof when it leaked. When she went out to gather wild roots, he carried her basket. She never asked him to, but he wanted to. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the red rocks, they sat together near the fire. The light painted their faces gold. Naya began to hum an old song, one that her grandmother used to sing long ago. The tune was soft, full of memory. Toka closed his eyes and listened. He didn't understand all the words, but he felt peace, something he hadn't known since childhood. Weeks turned into months. Toka's heart grew calm. He no longer felt shame when people spoke of his marriage. He saw Naya as his teacher, his friend, and the quiet force that held his world together. He even began to smile more often, and when he did, Naya's eyes shone with a warmth that words could not describe. One night, after helping an injured horse give birth, Toka returned home late. He found Naya waiting by the fire. A bowl of stew kept warm for him. He sat down, tired, and said, "You didn't have to wait." She replied softly, "When you care for someone, you don't count the hours." He didn't answer, but his chest tightened. He realized how different she was from anyone he had known. Patient, wise, and kind beyond measure. That night, as he lay awake listening to the soft crackle of the fire, he thought about how much he had changed since the day of their wedding. He was no longer the angry young man who saw only age and duty. Now he saw gratitude, peace, and something like love growing quietly in his heart. By the time spring arrived again, the desert began to bloom after many months of dryness. Flowers opened under the warm sun, and the air carried the smell of rain. Toka looked at Naya as she walked among the wildflowers, collecting herbs in her basket. For the first time he smiled, not out of respect but out of affection. He whispered to himself, "Maybe life really knows better than we do." The boy who once felt trapped now felt free. And though he couldn't yet say it aloud, he knew his life had already changed. Because of the woman everyone said was too old for him, but who had quietly taught him what it meant to care, to listen, and to love. That spring evening ended with the two of them walking back home together, side by side, the sunset behind them painting their shadows long across the red earth. The story of Toka and Naya had only just begun, but already something beautiful had taken root in both their hearts, something stronger than age, stronger than fear, and more real than any dream Toka ever had. Years passed quietly after Toka's unexpected marriage to Naya. The young Apache man who once burned with anger and pride had slowly become calm, thoughtful, and steady. The people of the tribe noticed the change. He no longer argued with anyone or stormed away in frustration. He worked hard, spoke softly, and always stood beside Naya when someone needed help. Life in the village began to improve. The rains returned and the crops grew again. The river that had once dried up now ran through the valley, clear and full. But even with better times, sickness sometimes came. One winter, a strange fever spread through the camp. Many children fell ill and some of the older people grew weak. Naya, as always, didn't rest. She moved from hut to hut, carrying her leather bag full of herbs. She brewed teas, placed wet cloths on burning foreheads, and whispered prayers in the old Apache tongue. Toka followed her everywhere. He fetched water, carried firewood, and crushed the roots she needed. At first, he only helped because he felt it was right. But soon he began to feel something deeper. He felt proud to stand beside her. When one of the elders thanked him, saying, "Your wife is saving our people," Toka replied softly, "She's teaching me how to save them too." That night, as the fire crackled, Naya looked at him and said, "You have learned to see others' pain. That is the beginning of wisdom." He nodded but didn't speak. He knew her words were true. Weeks passed before the sickness left the camp. The people were weak but alive. The tribe gathered to thank Naya and Toka. For the first time, they called them the healers. It was an honor that once belonged only to the oldest and most experienced members. Toka felt humbled. The young man who once thought he had lost his freedom had now found his purpose. One night, as the stars covered the dark sky, Naya sat outside, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Toka joined her. She smiled and said, "When I first saw you, I knew you didn't want this marriage. But I saw something in you, a restless heart. The spirits brought you to me so you could learn peace." He looked at her and said quietly, "You gave me that peace." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the fire die down. The bond between them no longer felt strange. It was no longer about age or duty. It was about something deeper: respect, care, and a connection that only time and kindness could build. As the years went on, Toka learned everything Naya knew. She showed him where each healing plant grew, how to read the color of the leaves, and how to listen to the wind before picking herbs. "Nature speaks," she would say, "but only to those who listen." One spring, when the tribe traveled to the mountains to trade, a boy fell from a cliff while gathering berries. Toka climbed down to rescue him using vines and rocks and carried him back to camp. Naya treated the boy's broken arm, guiding Toka's hands as he wrapped the cloth tightly. When the boy recovered, Naya looked at Toka and said proudly, "You don't need me to guide you anymore." He smiled. "I will always need you," he said, but fate, as always, had its own path. That summer, Naya began to tire easily. At first she said it was nothing, just age catching up with her, but soon she could no longer walk to the hills to gather herbs. Toka noticed her breathing had changed. It was slower, heavier. He begged her to rest, but she refused. "There are still people who need me," she said. One night, while treating a child's fever, she fainted beside the fire. Toka lifted her in his arms and carried her home. For the first time, he was the one making the teas, crushing the herbs, whispering prayers. His hands trembled as he placed a cool cloth on her forehead. He remembered all her teachings, every step, every remedy. For days he stayed by her side, refusing to sleep. When she finally opened her eyes, weak but smiling, she whispered, "Now you understand. Love is not about years, it is about giving." Toka's eyes filled with tears. He took her hand gently and said, "You have given me everything." Naya recovered slowly, but her strength never fully returned. Still, her mind was sharp and her voice carried warmth. She spent her last months teaching Toka all she could. Every evening they sat near the doorway, watching the orange sun melt behind the desert hills. She told him about her childhood, about her dreams, and about the times she had lost people she loved. "Pain," she said, "is not meant to break us, it's meant to teach us where love lives." Toka listened to every word, memorizing them like sacred songs. He didn't know how long they had left together, but he knew he wanted to remember everything. One peaceful night, Naya sat by the fire and asked him to sing her favorite song, the one she used to hum when gathering herbs. His voice was soft, shaky, but full of love. When the song ended, she smiled, her eyes half closed. "That song," she whispered, "will call my spirit home one day." A few weeks later, Toka woke up before sunrise and noticed Naya was still asleep beside the fire. The morning light touched her face and she looked peaceful, so peaceful that he knew she had gone to join the ancestors. He sat beside her quietly, tears running down his face, but there was no anger or pain. There was only gratitude. That day, the entire tribe came to honor her. They burned sage, sang her songs, and placed her favorite herbs near her resting place. Toka stood still, feeling the desert wind brush against his face. It carried the scent of wild sage, her scent, and he knew she was still there, in every breath of wind, in every leaf that moved. After that day, Toka built a small medicine hut near the edge of the village, just where Naya used to grow her herbs. He kept her wooden bowls, her leather bag, and her stone grinder. People from other villages came to see him. They called him Toka the Healer. When someone asked where he learned his skills, he always smiled softly and said, "From the woman I didn't want to marry, but who gave me more than I ever dreamed." Over the years, he became a guide to the younger generation. He taught them to listen to the earth, to care for the sick, and to treat everyone with respect. He never remarried. He said his heart was already full, with love, lessons, and memories that no one could replace. Sometimes at sunset, Toka would walk to the hill where Naya was buried. He brought her favorite flowers, white desert blooms that only opened after rain. He would sit quietly, talking to her as if she were beside him. "The children are learning well," he would say softly. "The land is healing again. You'd be proud." The wind always answered him, gentle and warm, moving through the tall grass like a whisper. He liked to believe it was her voice, soft, calm, and full of peace. Years later, when Toka grew old, he often told his story to young men of the tribe. They listened in awe when he said, "I once thought love was about youth and beauty. I was wrong. Real love is when someone gives you wisdom, peace, and a reason to become better than you were." When his time finally came, Toka lay in the same hut he had built with his own hands. He looked out at the sky painted gold by the setting sun. He whispered her name, Naya, and smiled. Somewhere in that quiet desert evening, the wind rose softly, carrying her song once more through the valley. The people said they could almost hear two voices that night, blending together in the distance, one old, one young, forever united by love that time could not break. And so, the story of Toka and Naya became a legend among their people, a story told beside campfires for generations. It reminded everyone that sometimes the path we fear most leads us to the greatest gift of all, a heart that learns to love beyond years, beyond appearances, and beyond dreams.